Hey guys, welcome to day 7 of the Diary of Anne Frank. Today's diary entries, I picked a couple that she was actually talking about celebrating Hanukkah and celebrating St. Nicholas Day. I thought that would especially kind of strike a chord with you guys given the fact that we just went through Easter in our shelter-in-place situation, and you can kind of see how that impacted them as a group. This was actually the first major holiday that they missed, didn't miss, but that they weren't able to experience as people completely free to celebrate. So Hanukkah, just so that people know what that is an 8-day festival that Jewish people celebrate. And it was intended to celebrate the victory that Jews had over the Greeks. They were being oppressed for their religion. They were being kept from being able to express their religion, much like Anne and her family were being oppressed in this time. And what happened was when they got this victory, they rededicated the temple, and they only had one small flask of oil to light the menorah, which is that 7-armed candle. You've seen those before, candelabras that Jews use in worship. And they only had one small flask of oil to be able to light it, and it lasted for 8 days and 8 nights. So the 8-day festival of Hanukkah is intended to commemorate the miracle of the menorah staying lit for 8 days. St. Nicholas Day is also known as the Feast of St. Nicholas of Myra, who was a Christian bishop that was known for being a bringer of gifts, which is where our St. Nicholas comes from. And there are multiple ways that people celebrate St. Nicholas Day across the world. So Anne's family could have been celebrating it in a multitude of different ways. We don't really know how exactly they were celebrating it. But gift giving is always something that's involved in celebrating St. Nicholas Day. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Monday, December 7th, 1942. Dear Kitty, Hanukkah and St. Nicholas Day came almost together this year. Just 1 day's difference. We didn't make much fuss about Hanukkah. We just gave each other a few little presents, and then we had the candles. Quite often it's a full 8 days of presents, which is why she makes the distinction there. Because of the shortage of candles, we only had them alight for 10 minutes, but it is all right as long as you have the song. Mr. Van Daan has made a wooden candlestick so that too was all properly arranged. Saturday, the evening of St. Nicholas Day, was much more fun. Meep and Eli had made us very inquisitive by whispering all the time with Daddy, so naturally we guessed that something was on. And so it was. At 8 o'clock, we all filed down the wooden staircase through the passage in the pitch darkness. It made me shudder, and I wished that I was safely upstairs again, into the little dark room. There, as there are no windows, we were able to turn on a light. When that was done, Daddy opened the big cupboard. "Oh, how lovely!" we all cried. A large basket decorated with St. Nicholas paper stood in the corner, and on top was a mask of Black Peter. We quickly took the basket upstairs with us. There was a nice little present for everyone, with a suitable poem attached. I got a doll whose skirt is a bag for odds and ends. Daddy got bookends, and so on. In any case, it was a nice idea, and as none of us had ever celebrated St. Nicholas, it was a good way of starting. Yours, Anne. Thursday, December 10th, 1942. Mr. Van Daan used to be in the meat and sausage and spice business. It was because of his knowledge of this trade that he was taken on in Daddy's business. Now he is showing the sausage side of himself, which for us is by no means disagreeable. We had ordered a lot of meat, under the counter of course, for preserving in case we should come up upon hard times. It was fun to watch. First, the ways the pieces of meat went through the mincer 2 or 3 times. Then how all the accompanying ingredients were mixed with the minced meat, and then how the intestine was filled by means of a spout to make the sausages. We fried the sausage meat and ate it with sauerkraut for supper that evening. But the sausages had to be thoroughly dried first, so we hung them over a stick tied to the ceiling with a string. Everyone who came into the room began to laugh when they caught a glimpse of the row of sausages on show. They looked terribly funny. The room was in a glorious mess. Mr. Van Daan was wearing one of his wife's aprons swathed around his substantial person. He looked fatter than he is, and was busy with the meat. Hands smothered in blood, red face, and soiled apron made him look like a butcher. Mrs. Van Daan was trying to do everything at once, learning Dutch from a book, stirring the soup, watching the meat being done, sighing and complaining about her injured rib. That's what happens to elderly ladies who do such idiotic exercises to reduce their large behinds. Dussel had inflammation in one eye and was bathing it with chamomile tea by the fire. Pim, which is what she calls her dad, who was sitting on a chair in a beam of sunlight that shone through the window, kept being pushed from one side to the other. In addition, I think his rheumatism was bothering him, because he sat rather hunched up with a miserable look on his face, watching Mr. Van Daan at work. He looked exactly like some shriveled up old man from an old people's home. Peter was doing acrobatics around the room with his cat. Mummy, Margot, and I were peeling potatoes, and of course, all of us were busy doing everything wrong because we were so busy watching Mr. Van Daan. Dussel has opened his dental practice. For the fun of it, I must tell you about his first patient. Mummy was ironing, and Mrs. Van Daan was the first to face the ordeal. She went and sat in the chair in the middle of the room. Dussel began to unpack his case in an awfully important way, asked for some cologne as disinfectant and Vaseline to take the place of wax. He looked in Mrs. Van Daan's mouth and found 2 teeth which, when touched, just made her crumple up as if she was going to pass out utterly incoherent cries of pain. After a lengthy examination in Mrs. Van Daan's case, lasting in actual fact no more than 2 minutes, Dussel began to scrape away one of the holes. But no fear. It was out of the question. The patient flung her arms and legs about wildly in all directions until at one point Dussel let go of the scraper that remained stuck in Mrs. Van Daan's tooth. Then the fat was really in the fire. She cried as far as it was possible with such an instrument in one's mouth, tried to pull the thing out of her mouth, and only succeeded in pushing it further in. Mr. Dussel stood with his hands against his sides, calmly watching the little comedy. The rest of the audience lost all control and roared with laughter. It was rotten of us, because I, for one, am quite sure that I should have screamed even louder. After much turning, kicking, screaming, and calling out, she got the instrument free at last, and Mr. Dussel went on with his work as if nothing had happened. This he did so quickly that Mrs. Van Daan didn't have time to start any fresh tricks. But he'd never had so much help in all his life before. 2 assistants were very useful. Van Daan and I performed our duties well. The whole scene looked like a picture from the Middle Ages entitled A Quack at Work. In the meantime, however, the patient hadn't much patience. She had kept her eye on her soup and her meal. One thing is certain, Mrs. Van Daan won't be in such a hurry to allow herself to be treated again. Yours, Anne. And that, by the way, is a really funny scene in the play. I wish you guys would have gotten to see it, but they actually show that scene where he's working on Mrs. Van Daan's teeth. Tuesday, December 22nd, 1942. Dear Kitty, the Secret Annex has heard the joyful news that each person will receive an extra quarter of a pound of butter for Christmas. It says half a pound in the newspapers, but that's only for the lucky mortals who get their ration books from the government, not for Jews who have gone into hiding, who can only afford to buy 4 illegal ration books instead of 8. So obviously they didn't get to have, since they were in hiding, they didn't get to have the same rights to the ration books as possible. They were counting on people who did this illegally for Jews who were in hiding, like Anne and her family. So, they had to be really careful because 8 ration books would have looked really suspect, whereas 4 was maybe a little bit easier to pass off. So as you can imagine, that means they're eating half of the food that other people who aren't in hiding would be able to eat. We are all going to bake something with our butter. I made some biscuits and 2 cakes this morning. Everyone is very busy upstairs, and Mummy has told me that I must not go there to work or to read until the household jobs are done. Mrs. Van Daan is in bed with her bruised ribs, complaining the whole day long, allows herself to be given fresh dressings all the time and isn't satisfied with anything. I shall be glad when she's on her feet again and tidies up her own things, because I must say this for her. She is exceptionally industrious and tidy. All the while she is healthy in mind and body. She is cheerful, too. Just as if I didn't hear enough shh shh during the day for making too much noise. My gentleman, bedroom companion, now repeatedly calls out shh shh to me at night, too. According to him, I'm never even allowed to turn over. I refuse to take the slightest notice of him and shall go on shh-shing back to him the next time. He makes me furious. On Sundays, she's talking about Dussel, by the way, on Sundays especially, when he turns the light on early to do his exercises. It seems to take simply hours, while I, poor tormented creature, feel the chairs, which are placed at the head of my bed to lengthen it, slide backward and forward continually under my sleepy head. When he has ended with a couple of violent arm-waving exercises to loosen his muscles, his lordship begins his toilet. His pants are hanging up, so to and fro he must go to collect them. But he forgets his tie, which is lying on the table. Therefore, once more, he pushes and bumps against the chairs to get it. So she's trying to sleep, and he's doing all this stuff to bother her while she's trying to sleep. But I won't bore you any longer on the subject of old men. It won't make things any better, and all my plans of revenge, such as disconnecting the lamp, shutting the door, hiding his clothes, must be abandoned in order to keep the peace. Oh, I am becoming so sensible. One must apply one's reason to everything here, learning to obey, to hold your tongue, to help be good, to give in, and I don't know what else. I'm afraid I shall use up all my brains too quickly, and I haven't got so very many. Then I shall not have any left when the war is over. Yours, Anne. So I wanted to tell a quick story before I stop for today. So she was referencing the rationing that they did. My grandfather, I don't remember if I told you guys this before, my grandfather, my dad's dad, was in the American military in World War II. He was actually an MP, so he was military police. And he used to talk about, you couldn't get him to talk very much about the war until, right towards the end of his life. But I remember him talking about how lucky you were if you actually were able to eat chocolate, because that was kind of a rare ration card to have. So when you would have these ration cards, there would be only certain things that you were able to get. And so chocolate is one of those things that would be considered a luxury. And he talked about how great it was when you actually got an opportunity to eat chocolate. So when we complain about going to the grocery store and not being able to get the mac and cheese that we like, it kind of puts it a little bit into perspective when these people were, a lot more restricted than we are. So pull out your journal. And write today about what you're thinking, about, reflections on Anne's story, whatever comes to mind. See you tomorrow.